Okay. So this week we're talking about survey research, how it's done, why we use it, and the particulars involved in designing the survey itself. So we use surveys for basically every type of research we have, things that we can just ask people directly, like their perceptions, their beliefs, their experiences, and also just basic information like demographics, how much money do you make, your race, ethnicity, age, etc. Okay, so some basic examples of this would be like a victimization survey. We ask people, have you been a victim of a crime in a set amount of time? And then ask them to describe those experiences. We can also take a look at things like self-reported criminal activity. Ask people how often do they abuse substances? How often do they shoplift? How often do they pirate media? Things like that. And related to that, we can look at perceptions and attitudes, perceptions of police, fear of crime, perceptions of fairness, look at policy evaluations to see if something was effective or ineffective. So every type of research, every type of specialty within criminal justice, psychology, sociology, anthropology can all use survey design to explore any type of research topic. And surveys are in and of themselves just a list of questions provided to the respondent. These can be open-ended questions where the respondent has to provide their own answer to a question. For instance, describe the experience, describe being victimized. So the respondent has to provide their own detail here. These provide a lot of detail, but they are very, very difficult to analyze. In contrast to that, we have closed-ended questions. This is where the respondent selects an answer from a list. So what is your age? 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, going up. And then these closed-ended questions are very much easier to analyze, they are much easier to analyze, but there are difficulties in getting more detail, because as soon as you give someone a survey, you can't ask them more questions about it. Make sense? So going back to what we talked about with measurement, the closed-ended questions have to provide answers that are exhaustive. Everyone can answer the question, and mutually exclusive. Everyone has to pick one response, okay? Now, building on that is the idea of a skip pattern question. So something like that would be, have you ever been a victim of a crime? Yes or no? If yes, answer question 2. Make sense? So this allows respondents or researchers rather to differentiate between respondents. These people said yes, they get these questions. These people said no, they get these other questions. Everyone with me so far? All right. So something that you guys need to be familiar with, particularly if you are looking at using a survey for your experiment proposal, is that your questions themselves should be clear and unambiguous. You don't ask a question about more than one topic. You keep it very short and focused. The shorter the question is, the better, mainly because just like you don't like to read long-ass questions. You don't want to have to read a paragraph to figure out what the heck the survey is asking. And related to that, you have to avoid biased items or loaded terms. So you see this a lot with surveys put out by political campaigns. They will often use biased items. Do you support X or do you hate America? Okay. So you can't really ask that question and expect an unbiased response. So the goal here is to use neutral language and avoid those emotional or socially desirable responses, because if someone makes an emotional response, you're just capturing that. You're not capturing their true feelings or their true perceptions. So a big issue with surveys is the idea that they are going to answer based on, yes, their personal experiences, but also how they want or how they think the researcher wants them to respond. So this is often called social desirability, where the subjects will answer based on what they believe that the researcher expects from them or how they would like to be seen as. So if I asked a question like, how intelligent do you feel you are? Not at all, somewhat, average, very, extremely. A lot of people are going to say, I am above average. Very few people are going to say, I'm not intelligent. And that's because they want to be seen as intelligent. Make sense? Similarly, you don't want to ask something about like a confidential topic, or if you do ask those questions, if you do ask questions like, do you have racial biases, or do you have sexist biases, or whatever, you have to understand that the respondent may respond based on their wanting to not seem like a racist or a sexist. So the researcher has to understand that any question they ask that deals with those types of topics, social desirability is going to affect things, all right? And this is where the design and the ethics behind the survey come into play, because someone's going to be more honest when they are anonymous, okay? And even if they're not anonymous, the researcher has to promise that they are going to keep their responses confidential. Because if you're asking someone about their criminal behavior, that person probably doesn't want that information turned over to the police or made public, that this person admitted to using this drug X number of times the past year. Like, that's an embarrassing thing. You don't want an employer knowing that. You don't want your professors or family members knowing that. So asking those types of questions, the researcher has to keep in mind the ethics of what they're asking. Pat, Kaylin, I know you guys came in late. Everything making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I picked up where we're at right now. It's mostly considering the like the screen says, social desirability. I mean, it's similar to the NCVS, right?
Right.
No one's really going to answer that they were sexually assaulted if they're just asked, because that's not something that someone wants to admit. It's not something people are proud of. It's not something that they're happy about. And honestly, in some situations, people don't want to relive it. So you have to be careful when you're asking questions that are sensitive about someone's personal nature.
Definitely. And it's not just like asking sensitive questions. People can be very afraid about that information getting out. There was that whole argument with the federal administration trying to add, are you a U.S. citizen on the U.S. Census that just came out?
Yeah, like, I remember that actually.
That was a huge issue with survey design because people were afraid, is my response actually confidential? Because if it's not, then I may see more immigration and customs enforcement in my area. I may see more proactive stops. My schools, my roads, my state and local government may get less funding from the administration because there are more non-citizens living in this district or this census tract or whatever. So everyone who is involved in either using the census data like I am, or who I guess cares about local education, local issues, is rightly concerned that if fewer people participate in the census because they are afraid of their responses not being confidential, then they are not going to participate and our data isn't going to be as meaningful.
Yep.
Right? Making sense?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. So when we look at how surveys are designed, the formatting actually does matter quite a bit, because what you ask someone first, second, or third, and so on, is going to affect their subsequent responses. So if you open the survey with a very in-depth survey of their victimization experiences, they may not respond how they normally would have to the next section, their perceptions of fear of crime or their perceptions of the police, something like that. So when researchers are designing their survey, they may do things like have multiple survey formats. So they'll vary when things are asked in the survey to see if this was an actual issue. And related to that, the researcher also has to consider how they're asking the question. So things like word use, sentence structure, complexity is going to vary based on who they're trying to survey. So a survey of college students is going to look very, very different than a survey of middle school students. Make sense? Just because it's not just like what we're asking, but how we're asking it. Asking a college student their gender identity and giving them the full list, like male, female, trans female, asexual, non-conforming, etc., is going to get different responses than asking that same question to middle school students. You're going to have to ask the question in a different way to get that level of detail. And you also have to remember, if you're asking about someone's past experiences, their memory is going to be flawed. Like, you guys are college students. Do you remember the last 5 addresses you've had? Maybe?
I do, yeah. I've only had 2, so.
Oh, well, you're not the norm then.
Yeah.
I lived in 3 places in Cincinnati. I lived in 2 places in West Lafayette when I was an undergrad, and I've lived in 1 place here in Hayes. So something like that, asking someone, hey, where did you live? What are your past 5 addresses? Someone like Kaylin, pretty easy to remember. You got 2. Yep. Someone like me, if we're taking the same survey, my memory is going to be faulty unless I can log into Amazon and see where all my packages were shipped. So when you're asking someone about their past experiences, like, when did this happen? When did you get this job? How long have you been working here? How long has this problem been going on? Just because, like, it's not about a controversial topic or a sensitive topic, you're still relying on someone's memory. All right. So I'm going through this really, really fast. So if something doesn't make sense, please stop me. So when we talk about administering surveys, so it's not just the format, it's not just how the questions are asked, but also how are you giving the person the survey? So basically we have 4 ways that we can give someone a survey. We can do it in person, actually handing you a piece of paper and then collecting that paper at the end. We can mail it to you, like the census. We can call you over the phone, which in this day and age, fewer and fewer people are doing now. And we can also use the internet to survey people. So when you're thinking about how you're going to give a survey, each of these methods are going to give you a lot of different answers and different types of answers and different response rates. So for instance, in person, you're physically handing someone a survey and having them complete it and give it back to you. This is the most likely method to get a response. However, you're going to run into issues with social desirability because now you, the participants, are now having to hand me the document that says, hey, I experienced victimization, or hey, I do this immoral or illegal behavior. So people are less likely to admit things that are somewhat sensitive. For instance, course evaluations. They used to do them in person. Me, the instructor, could give you, the student, course evaluations. So we have 11 people in our in-person class. I could pretty easily figure out who gave who just by who turned in their survey first. So you guys would recognize that. There are only 11 people in here. How can I make sure that my responses are anonymous? So social desirability. You don't want to piss off the person who is grading your paper, or you don't want to offend the person by saying, hey, you kind of sucked this week. So social desirability is going to play a big role. And additionally, this is also the most time consuming because you have to have the researcher or a research assistant or someone in the research team physically in the room with the participants. So we're talking about a lot of time to get a big enough sample to actually be meaningful, to be representative of someone's views or population's views. Via mail kind of balances this out a little bit because we're sending the survey out to physical addresses, all right? This can very, very easily create a sample that is meaningful across a geographic area. For instance, when we look at the census, it's sent to every single address. If it's a house or an apartment building, it gets the survey in every mailbox. However, this gets expensive very, very, very quickly. Stamps right now cost, I think, like 53 cents. So you have to mail the survey to someone and you have to provide them a stamp to mail it back. So you're talking about $1 per every single survey you send out. And when we're talking about like a sample of Hayes, there are what, 25,000 people here to send a survey to every single person or household, not even person, living in Hayes would cost upwards of $20,000 or more. And most people don't fill out surveys the first time. How many of you guys have received a mailer about the census? Have you received multiple ones? I've counted. I've received 4. I did the census the first time it came out. I'm still receiving census mailers. So the federal government may spend like $12 on me this year. So this is a very expensive, very time-consuming kind of thing. But it's also the most common because when we look at something like the census, done every 10 years, the American Community Survey, that part of the census that actually gives you more information, like income level, commuting, household characteristics, education level, things like that, that's done in every census tract every 5 years. So we're providing more context to this. All right, making sense? All right, so some newer methods or new-ish ways to get surveys or survey data is, one of the more common ones is over the telephone. So someone calls a telephone number and records people's responses. One of the key benefits of this is you can contract this out. There are companies out there who do this as their entire job, like call centers, customer service call centers. One of the key vulnerabilities, though, is it can be very, very biased if you're using something like a landline or a phone book as your sampling frame, the list of participants. So, for instance, how many of you guys have a landline that you are tied to and not your parents? Yeah, not a chance, right? Because why would you have a landline? You have a cell phone. So the only people I know of who have landlines are my grandparents. So people in their 80s can respond to a survey that uses landlines. Everyone below 70 or 80 that I know has a cell phone. Additionally, this is very vulnerable to people just hearing that this is a survey and then hanging up. Like, I'm willing to bet you guys have mistakenly answered a phone call and realized it was a customer service survey or a scam or a political survey and then just hung up.
Oh, yeah.
I've done that all the time. Like, I don't think I answer my phone now. I actually just declined a phone call, actually. So this is going away, I'm willing to bet. Calling people's actual telephones, yeah, it's probably not going to exist in another decade. What is going to exist, what's going to become more and more prevalent, is via the internet surveys. So the researcher basically uploads a survey to a website and then has the respondent complete it. This is what the actual census has been doing now. You can complete the census via the internet, or you can wait for them to send you a physical hard copy. This is, honest to God, the easiest thing in the world for a researcher to do. Like, your course evals are considered online surveys. So you guys get a link to your email address, you click on the link, you enter your information, you hit submit. And then I don't have to waste time collecting data because your data is already collected. It's already in an Excel or SPSS or Stata data sheet, so I can just analyze it. However, low response rates are pretty common. So it's not uncommon for an online survey to get a response rate of like 10%, which you can't really do much because anyone who looks at that is going to ask, well, what the heck does the other 90% of the population you're looking at think? Which is kind of why when I give course evals, I make it so that 80% of the class has to complete the survey for anyone to get extra credit for it. So that way I can have a great response rate and also reward everyone, because I'm not above bribery when it comes to course evals. Related to this, related to the fact that it is over the internet, the sample itself may be biased in the opposite direction compared to telephone and mail surveys, because your generation, my generation, we're very, very connected online. However, your parents, my parents, our grandparents are less online, okay? So we are more likely to complete an online survey than our parents and grandparents. So our views, our responses may only represent the younger generations when it's conducted over the internet compared to mail or telephone. Making sense?
Yep.
All right. So for response rates, and this is one of the biggest sticking points when it comes to surveys themselves, is you need a good sample. You need a good amount of people to consider that your survey is representative of the population you're looking at. So a good, I guess, rule of thumb for this would be at least 50%. You need 50% of the people you're looking at to complete the survey. So if you're looking at understanding Fort Hayes's views of the police and their fear of crime on campus, we would need 2,000 or 2,500 people to complete the survey for it to be actually representative. And we would also have to see if the characteristics of the people who responded are systematically different than our population. For instance, if no one in the Worth College of Business completed the survey of perceptions of the police and fear of crime, our sample would be systematically biased. We would not know anything about a key component of the university. A way that researchers can try to boost their response rates is through rewarding their participants. So for instance, I reward participants in course evals by giving people 5 or 10 extra credit points. I take a look at the response rate. If I have 80% or better, everyone gets X number of points. If we don't reach that threshold, no one gets any, because I'm relying on peer pressure to boost my response rates. Other things that universities do, the University of Cincinnati raffled off 5 iPads. The Student Affairs Office bought 5 iPads or had someone donate them or whatever. And the way that they boosted response rates was entered everyone who completed the survey into a raffle. As soon as the survey was over, they submitted their responses and they had the option to enter their student ID. And the Student Affairs Office drew 5 student IDs out and gave people iPads. I mean, that was a pretty effective way of encouraging responses, because while you didn't give everyone an iPad, everyone had an equal chance, and everyone kind of thought, what's the harm here? Making sense? So how do researchers choose to, oh yeah, Kalen.
Actually, I just kind of realized something. So you can kind of break the anonymity, or you can make people sacrifice their anonymous level if you're giving them a reward, or as long as they're okay with it. Or yeah, I guess what you said, it was optional, right?
Right. And
Okay.
related to that, you can keep your survey responses anonymous, but as soon as you collect information to give someone a reward, you are basically making their participation confidential.
Okay.
Which, this is a very great question, because you are now getting into issues of, what if you're the only person who has this particular characteristic?
Yeah.
There was a survey I worked on when I was at UC where several people in the command staff didn't want to complete the survey because they looked around the command staff and said, I'm the only one like me. I'm the only black female lieutenant on the command staff. So you're asking me about my gender, my race, and my rank.
Yep.
So this is no longer anonymous for me. I can't be honest in the survey because I am now putting my information in there. So yeah, that's a pretty big issue. And we had to basically say, your boss is not going to get any information. We're not giving anyone raw data. The raw data is going to sit in a laptop and be only ours.
Okay.
And she didn't end up participating because she didn't trust us, which...
That's fair.
Fair, yeah. And that's something that researchers have to decide. How are we going to administer this survey? We have a list of questions that's going to get at all the different concepts and issues that we want to look at. So how are we going to get this survey in front of people? And they make that decision by figuring out what their resources are, who they want to reach, and what they want to do with the information. So if I'm looking at perceptions of crime within a police department, I can go to each shift meeting for a week and just hand everyone who comes in the door a survey. Take 5 minutes, do this survey, give it back, we're good. All right, that would be fine, because my results would only be meaningful for that police department and what they've experienced the past several weeks or months or whatever. If I'm looking at the community, understanding how the police think would be important, but it wouldn't tell me what the community thinks about crime.
Yeah.
Make sense? So, last little bit. The problems and the benefits of survey data. Well, problems first are that it's fairly imprecise, because we're asking people to tell us what they think, not what is. Unless you had your paycheck in front of me, how many of you could tell me what you made the last year? I have no idea, honestly. I could not tell you what my wife and I made last year unless I had my taxes in front of me. So asking someone, hey, how much money did you make? You can get kind of a range, but if you ask someone a specific dollar amount, pretty imprecise. Same with asking someone, particularly if they are a habitual offender, for instance, if they're a drug user and they've been arrested 100 friggin' times, asking them, hey, when's the last time you were arrested? Or when was the first time you've been arrested? You might get oh, that was years ago. I have no idea. And more importantly, I think, the responses that you get from a survey are not going to be predictive of actual behavior or the person's actual experiences. For instance, how many of your family members are deathly afraid of going to a place like Wichita or Kansas City? Because that's where the crime is. My parents. They hate driving in Kansas City or Wichita because they're afraid. Okay. So it's not actually predictive of what they experience. It's predictive of their perceptions. Okay. And that's getting into the fact that any result you get from survey data is going to be affected by social desirability, people wanting to be seen a certain way. Their response bias, how you actually send that survey out, is going to affect who's going to participate. And the fact that you're relying on people's memory and perceptions of their own and other people's behavior. So if you've ever been cut off in traffic, were you really cut off? Or were you tailgating someone and someone was forced in to merge really quickly? Like, did you make the mistake or was it someone else? People are going to always basically say, oh, that other person made the mistake. I wasn't tailgating or I wasn't doing X. All right. And bottom line, you're relying on people to be honest and give honest, thoughtful responses when they're answering the survey. You're asking a question about people's drug use behavior. How many college students are going to be honest about this? Or alcohol use?
I think it varies.
Some students, yeah, will probably be very, very honest.
For the drug use, I think some people are more willing to admit that they have smoked marijuana versus, done heroin, smoked meth, any of that.
Right. So again, you're running into that issue of, can I trust what this person has put on paper?
Yeah.
All right. Now, all that being said, surveys are extremely beneficial. All right. First and foremost, the researcher has direct control over what is collected, what data, what questions are being asked, who is going to be asked, everything. So we're not relying on agency data to turn this over. We're not having to sit out in a field and observe people's behavior. And related to that, we can produce very, very, very consistent results. So remember what reliability is. We're very consistent. You give someone a survey, time one, a month later, you give them the same survey, their responses are going to be very, very similar. All right? And in many respects, this is the only quantitative way to gather data on topics. Like, we can't really rely on official data about victimizations that aren't reported to the police. Like, we just can't. This is not something that we can go out and observe unless we installed surveillance cameras at the four corners of every single building and had a single person monitor every single camera. Like, there's no way in hell we will be able to answer anything about this topic. And related to that, like, a lot of research and risk assessments and things that might predict whether or not someone would succeed for cognitive behavioral therapy or probation and parole treatment. Like, we have to use risk assessments, personality assessments, behavioral assessments, and those are effectively surveys. So when we're asking questions like, hey, how impulsive are you? How difficult do you find it to sit still? How many issues have you had with not being able to show up on time or budget appropriately? Or do you have issues with substances? Do you find it difficult to go 4 or 5 days without alcohol? Things like that. So when we're asking someone a risk assessment, we're still giving them that survey. We're still asking questions that they have to fill out. So it is still a valid measure. It's still a valid way to collect data. Making sense?
Yep.
Anyone have any questions? All right. I'm going to stop recording.